the world as we knew it 20 years ago has changed fundamentally, and so very fundamentally that the role of learning and education that we can use for day-to-day living has also changed forever. Are we adequately prepared, or is organized education going to continue to be about compliance, obedience, accreditation, memorizing facts, and learning to do tasks? And I hope Akanksha would be discussing all of this. Akanksha today will talk about the what and how of unpacking 21st century skills in schools and classrooms. She will also share her findings from her evaluation studies of the integration of 21st century skills in school education across the world. The format of the talk for all participants would be our guest speaker, Akanksha, would speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. That would be followed by a moderated Q&A for about 15 to 20 minutes. You can use the chat box to post your questions, and we will try to take up as many questions as we can given the time that we have with us. And lastly, the speaker would once again make closing concluding remarks. Thank you, and now over to you, Akanksha.
Thank you. Could I share my screen? Okay. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining in today. It's really an honor to be here, and Dr. Balu, thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to talk about 21st century skills, the what and the how. The reason this title has been chosen is because we have been struggling as an organization with the what and the how of 21st century skills for many, many years. Our work is focused on the evaluation of education programs, and for the past 5 years, more and more focus has been on the measurement of the impact of programs that are trying to teach 21st century skills. So we'll dive right into what these skills are and what's it all about, because there's a lot of confusion about how do we define them, how do we identify them, how do we teach them, and what are the methods. So this is a chart which is showing data for over 100 years on how the discourse has changed in talking about 21st century skills. So we did a search for these terms: creativity, empathy, critical thinking, and executive functioning. And we see that in book texts over the last 100 years, there has been a real increase in the frequency of occurrence of these terms. So clearly the conversation on 21st century skills or life skills is growing. So what are these skills? 21st century skills encompass a wide range of skills, attitudes, and competencies required by individuals to make informed decisions, solve problems, think critically and creatively, communicate effectively, build relationships, empathize, and manage their lives in a healthy and productive manner. Also, I would like to point out that a number of different interchangeable terms are used for 21st century skills. Life skills, non-cognitive skills, non-academic skills, character skills, and so on. We will not get into the debate of distinguishing one from the other. For now, we'll just put them all under one bucket of 21st century skills. So one of the first problems is that there are very complex definitions. If you take a very seemingly straightforward skill such as empathy, we think we know what it means, but when we actually had people write down what empathy is, we got, and this is just a very small sample, we got a huge variety of what people think it might be. For example, someone says that it's tearing down barriers to listen, the ability to understand someone, or walking in someone else's shoes. Now, if you think about it, as a practitioner, if you're trying to teach a child empathy, how do you teach them tearing down barriers versus walking in someone else's shoes? So the first thing is we need to have clarity on what we even mean by these skills. And so if there is confusion around what they are, it's completely natural for it to be there. This kind of confusion then leads to ambiguous usage. For example, we found this in a research paper saying, and a very rigorous quantitative paper, children from low-income backgrounds often have lower levels of cognitive skills and socio-emotional maturity. Now, how do we distinguish between cognitive skills and socio-emotional maturity if we are trying to build them, or if we're trying to measure them or assess them? So again, the point being made that we really need some kind of clarity on what's going on over here. On top of that, we have many skills as part of this. There are numerous frameworks that have talked about life skills, 21st century skills. And this set of skills has actually emerged from a roundtable convening. Dr. Balu, you were part of that as well, where about 25 different organizations talked about their interventions and what they were trying to teach. And this sort of master list emerged from that conversation. And we can see that if we have so many skills that there's no way we can either teach them or prioritize them very easily either. So the whole skill space is pretty complex. On top of that, we have some of the gold standard frameworks which talk about it, like the OECD framework, the World Economic Forum framework, the P21 or the Hilton Pellegrino, where there is a lot of overlap or kind of crosstalk between things. So over here, for example, if you see in the P21 framework, we have creative thinking in one set of learning skills and flexibility in another set of life skills. And when we actually, look at creative thinking or creativity and unpack it, we find that flexibility is part of that. So how do we start making sense of what's going on over here? So there's a lot of confusion. There's therefore leading, issues with design of interventions. How do we select what skills we need to start teaching? Issues with developing measurements or assessments for these skills. And then the inability of the research and education community to even have a common language for discussion. I've had arguments with people when I've been, saying empathy, someone's been saying compassion, and we say it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing. And then therefore, if that's not happening, then there's an inability to come to a consensus on how do we prioritize it. So given this entire background of the confusion and ambiguity around life skills, we set out about 4.5 years ago to do research and trying to understand what this is all about. This kind of list that I had shown earlier, we were getting these set of skills from multiple organizations that we were trying to measure the interventions of. So we would get an organization come to us with a list of 30 or 40 skills saying we need to measure all of this because this is what we're teaching in our entrepreneurship program. So we put all of them together, try to characterize them or classify them, and then came up with 4 or 5 broad buckets, and then went deep dive into each of these 4 buckets. Once we had done that, then we also aligned these specific skills with the available measurement methods, just to have a resource available for anyone who's trying to teach or measure assess the skills in students. So the 4 skills that we identified were creativity, critical thinking, empathy, and executive function. When we look at each of these in detail, we understand how vast this entire space is. So for example, creativity is broken down into all of these close to 20 separate constructs. And the ones here in the filled out boxes are the ones where we found tests or assessments available. And these ones were where we had no tests that we could find at least. Similarly, we broke down the constructs for critical thinking. And again, there are some which have assessments available, some which don't. Empathy, we did the same thing. And then executive function was the same. We also had leadership related skills emerging through a number of our interventions that we were evaluating. But unfortunately, we could not do much of a literature review on that because there isn't much available for the domain of school, K-12 or even higher education. It goes beyond into the management literature. So we weren't really able to pull out the constructs for leadership. But if we examine it carefully, then a combination of executive function and empathy in a way brings together the leadership qualities that we might be seeking in students. So these were the 4 broad buckets that we looked at. These are the the constructs that they got broken down to. And then what this also revealed in the process, one is confirm the fact that the skills are complex and they're made up of several interrelated constructs. For example, if we look at associative thinking or logical thinking in the creativity set of skills, it's also necessary for the critical thinking set of skills. So there's a lot of crosstalk. So when we ask the question of what do we teach and how do we teach, we need to be cognizant of the fact that they all the skills will have to grow together, and you cannot teach one independent of another. So now the question of how do we go about doing this? A lot of these constructs do not have assessments associated with them, as I had mentioned earlier. And so how do we teach and how do we even assess it? So the first thing we need to do is to start thinking also about assessments. The skills are not the same as academic skills or subject knowledge. And if you're thinking of something like creativity, there's no way you can test it out on a pen and paper test. So we need to start thinking very creatively about creativity assessments as well. The mechanisms of assessing could be completely different. For example, we could give, and I know a lot of these will not work at the kind of scale we're looking at in India. But for example, looking at, blocks and how kids can build something out of basic blocks, which could be reflective of the kind of complexities that they can create. The other way, and this is a slide that I will spend a little bit of time on, and this is our current ongoing study, which is near completion. We've done a global review of 16 or 17 different organizations across 4 continents, looking at very unique methods to introduce life skills. So these methods cover, for example, computational skills, the Reggio Emilia approach, professional development, music, design thinking, life skills transformation approaches, tinkering, whole school approaches, debating, sport, art, movement, media. So all of these different methods have been used to teach and learn 21st century skills. These are very well established organizations, which was one of the criteria for us to select them. So they have been doing work for at least 10 years or more. And they have reflected there's some kind of a change happening in the participants of these programs. Now, what is it that they are doing that's actually working? And that's the next slide is going to be talking about that. There have been certain common factors across all of these organizations in their design and implementation, which have actually helped to implement and have an impact on the beneficiaries. So this is a lot to take in, and I'll just point out a few key things over here. So we have tried to pull out the key design features of all of these programs, and we're trying to build a framework for designing life skills intervention. So what are all the factors that one needs to consider in order to try and implement an effective life skills intervention? There's a lot over here, but I would like to point out a few things. For example, over here, we have mentorship and the role of the adult. This has been key across all organizations. So, and when we think about scaling up, a lot of times what happens is the programs tend to get diluted out as you take it from, school to state to national level. So how the role of the adult can continue to be fostered through that kind of a scale up is something that we should probably keep in mind. Another very interesting piece was the ownership of the program. So how involved are the stakeholders themselves in the development and implementation of the program is crucial to having an effective life skills intervention. Again, because we're looking at something which is very different from academic learning, play-based learning seems to be quite key over here as well. Play seems to be at the center. So if people are not having fun while they're learning these skills, it's very unlikely this will happen. And I think I would like to add as a general point that when we're thinking about scaling up, the dilution that happens at the scale is not going to help in an effective intervention. So that's something that really needs to be kept in mind as we're taking this forward. And looking ahead, we have done another piece of research recently, which is available in our COVID-19 report. And we interviewed stakeholders, almost 300 stakeholders from about, I think, 20 plus countries. And a lot of the experts have expressed that the next stage of learning post-COVID is going to be 21st century skills. And over here it says, moving forward, any dialogue on learning cannot afford to be dissociated from a dialogue on skills. Also, these were some of the specific skills that emerged through this conversation on what should post-COVID learning look like. So empathy, in compassion, resilience has been really strongly stated by experts. And also our latest new education policy says that, you know, some of the principles of the policy are based on skills like rational thought and action, empathy, courage, resilience. So going forward, I think 21st century skills definitely are going to be crucial to learning. And I think that's where I will stop at this point in time.
Ramesh, do we have any quick questions to start off? I could see a couple of them in the chat box. There was one question which was partially answered, but I'll still take it up. The learning has really changed in this, in this COVID era. Will we? The question goes on, like, will we really change fundamental learning for the coming days? The last 6 months have changed our normal, what we would call as normal.
Okay. I think this is actually a very remarkable inflection point in education. And we need to take advantage of the fact that things have significantly changed. And the COVID report that I just mentioned is actually titled From Schooling to Learning. So definitely schooling is not happening across most of the countries in the world today. But learning in some form or another is going on. And some of the respondents to the survey, particularly the experts and the parents, made some statements which were very telling, in that they said, you know, even learning how to organize yourself, or learning how to be around the house or help people or be kind, are all this is all learning. So we need to start rethinking about learning as not just academic knowledge. And we've been talking about this for a very long time. But I think now is a point where we're actually seeing that. So recognizing that learning is happening despite the fact that, you know, lessons may or may not be happening, and very aware of the fact that there's not access for everyone in terms of digital learning right now. But regardless, learning is happening. It's of a very different nature, but we need to recognize that it is learning.
A quick question on something that, you know, I have grappled with right from my childhood. You know, I've always found classrooms claustrophobic and textbooks restrictive. So I'll ask this question. One of the things is, you know, words have powerful meanings. I mean, we're talking about 21st century skills, about learning and other things. So how do we actually define that, given that, you know, most often of the most important stakeholder is the person who's actually learning, who's going through this the entire process of learning, and it's adults who are actually deciding on what the children want to learn. So how is it possible at all for us to get the voice of the child, or do we have to go back to our own childhoods to bring that voice in when we look at bringing in 21st century skills or changing the way? Because I at least you know, always felt that schooling meant domestication, that we would be asked to comply, that write an examination, do this, do that, and don't do this and don't do that. So how do we move children, and you know, and how do we change mindsets? I think that is crucial. Is there anything at all to do how we can
I
change?
have a couple of anecdotes in a way to respond to this. So one is the OECD is currently working on their learning compass, so they first developed the compass as a student-centric piece on student agency. And now they're going ahead to talk about teacher agency and how that can then support student agency. In the last focus group meeting that we had a few weeks ago, very interestingly, and for the first time in over a decade that I've been in the education sector, we had students as part of that meeting with the secretariat of the OECD. So the students were actually giving inputs on what works for them in the classroom. And I think that's a voice I have been fighting to get students into grown-up conferences for many years, but this was the first time it happened, and it was really, really something. So getting their voices on the table is really crucial. The second point is from the point of view of teachers. So again, another anecdote on this. We know, and there's a lot of pushback when we mention the Finland example in India, saying this cannot be done in India. But we should really be aspiring for that. So one of the very celebrated teachers, in an interview, I was asking them how they managed to implement their programs, because their assessments are not quantitative, like they're not multiple choice. They have in-depth reviews that they do for every child in the classroom. Also, teachers are completely free to take I mean, as long as they're meeting the learning requirements, the learning goals, they can use any kind of methodology to do that. Any kind of content is allowed to be used, and any way, whether it's digital or they take them out to museum trips or whatever it may be, the teacher's completely free to decide how they want to do it. So my question to them was, how do they ensure that the teachers are actually doing their job, and who monitors the teachers? And the response of this one teacher was this very blank look when they said they trust us. So, and I was very taken aback. So they trust you. So yeah, they completely trust us. So I think that mindset change needs to come through the entire system, from the top to the bottom. And I was going through the new education policy, and despite the fact that the opening of it talks about a very idealistic, forward-looking and progressive ideas, if you go into it in depth, it's actually very, very constricting. There's a lot of control over very small details, to the point that at some level it mentions that chana and good needs to be served to students. That kind of minute detail, which means they really do not trust how this is going to get implemented. So that has sort of been a sore point even through the course of development of the new education policy. So I think that level of trust needs to come both ways, from the parents as well as from the system and policymakers as well. And I am not sure how we will go about doing that, but that is going to be key to start thinking about skills. Because if you're working in a system where the skills are not being demonstrated, they cannot be taught.
Great. We have a couple of questions. I would like to kind of club them. In India, when we are operating at scale, there seems to be a curriculization of these skills. And what I mean by that is CBSE rolled out a plan or a curriculum for value education, or certain values, 50 odd values which were made a part of the curriculum, which had to be identified by the students. Now, having the capability to identify does not necessarily mean that you actually inculcate them. So there are a couple of questions in the chat box which talk about how do we identify the skills. Is there a standard curriculum which we can now, in which all the teachers will be trained and then they'll be able to implement it? And the second part of the question is, are these skills kind of graded in the sense that, okay, someone in this age group or in this grade is expected to pick these certain skills? Or can you also kind of throw light on have these models been implemented somewhere else as well?
So could you repeat the last part of the second question?
Have there been models where the skills have been kind of graded as age appropriate, and when it actually put into implementation, do we have models from across the world where we know that there are successes from a particular strategy being implemented?
Right. So I'll talk to the second question first, and I'll request you to repeat the first one again afterwards. So essentially, yes, so skills are graded in that they develop over a period of time. Particularly, there are two growth spurts. One is early childhood years and adolescence, where there is a major uptake of skills that happen. There is still a lot of research that needs to be done in trying to understand exactly what skills are being picked up at what time in life. But yes, there is a progression of skills, and they build on top of each other. It is not linear. It is a mess, and we need to accept that. But at the same time, yes, there will, if you say, for example, look at creativity as a skill, you may have certain constructs or certain subparts of it developing at some point in time. So for example, when children are, taking on free play. They're just doing whatever. It's a lot of exploratory and very creative period, where it's just random ideas and a lot of imagination, but then it gets more structured as you go further down. So even how the skills are acquired and what aspects of the skills are acquired changes over a period of time. And it is also very individualized. So yes, we need to be very cognizant of that fact as we are teaching and learning these skills. And so I'm going to ask you to repeat the second.
Yeah, the first question was with respect to do we have a structured curriculum which is in place to help teachers go ahead and implement that?
There are curricula which are being put together, at least in the Indian context, and in a lot of the countries where there is an emphasis, particularly I would say Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands, Finland, etc. They don't necessarily have a separate curriculum to implement skills. So collaboration, for example, is very inbuilt into the normal school day. It is something that is reported on a very regular basis, and collaboration also has its definition. So just sitting at the same table and doing your own bits is not collaboration. Separating out parts of a task, saying you do this, you do this, and you do this, and then we put it together is also not the best level of collaboration. Collaboration is defined over there as when everyone comes together and does something, and in the end you don't really know who has done what. So that's real teamwork. So they do have these gradations or like a rubric for what they think, but that is built into their school day in every activity. So it's not an add-on, and that's, I think, something we need to be very cognizant of, that life skills cannot be taught as, okay, today I'm going to teach you about, kindness. It needs to be modeled, it needs to be built in, and there needs to be a systemic support in order for that skill to be built as well. So we are not just looking, and the slide I had shared earlier with regards to the framework for designing skills talks about a lot of these factors, which will have to come together, not just as one or two, but as a whole, for any effective take-up of skill to happen.
Just a follow-up question on that. Can you just elaborate on the role of a school or a teacher in designing a curriculum for themselves to be implemented by them?
Designing a curriculum for themselves. I think the role of a teacher is very, very crucial. I think the role of a role model or a mentor or an adult plays a very important part in the acquisition of life skills. So one is just the presence of a mentor is very, very important. The second thing is, I think we will, as I mentioned, we need to think of these skills very differently from how we have been thinking about teaching academic knowledge and assessing academic knowledge. So when we think about developing that curriculum, we will have to really think outside of the box, outside of the classroom, outside of the school. So it may or may not necessarily happen only in the school. There will have to be an influx of other ideas, other factors, inspiration coming in for a skill to be acquired. Creativity, for example, you cannot have children imagining solutions to problem with only the knowledge that is provided in the textbook. They will need external information. They could be building a prototype for which they will need access to a lot of other resources available online, or access to experts who are outside of the school who can come in and talk to them, or maybe a visit to a factory to see how things happen. So we'll have to think about these, the role of the teacher will have to be to first do some unlearning from what the original way of teaching and learning was. I think, so we have been implementing tinkering workshops across Bangalore, Delhi, and Bombay for a range of demographics and age groups as well. Also, we've done some workshops for teachers, and we find that this unlearning piece, so tinkering is a very interesting example because it's very hard to define the goals of tinkering. Essentially, you're messing around with stuff, you're failing, you're redoing things. There is no end to it. So for example, if I have been given, one statement saying, build a scribbling robot, I can build as complex a robot using any kinds of, Arduinos, etc. Or I can build something very, very basic, which is just mechanical. So there is no limit to how much you can mess with. So the setting of the goal and, how do you grade whether a certain child has done a good enough job or not is very crucial. We have had children where we said they've done an excellent job because they just sat there for 3 hours and didn't create a ruckus, and that was an achievement. as opposed to some children who built very, very complex robots and you said, okay, this is not good enough because you can do better. So one is it is going to have to be very individualized as well. But also the challenge has been for us to take that step back and say, okay, learning looks very, very different for skills. And there's no way we can teach it or measure it in the same way as we have been doing so far.
Okay, just to add to that question, there are about 4 or 5 questions related to this. I'm kind of clubbing them together. We have very resource limited settings. There are limited teacher capacities in a huge country like India. So one of the questions was actually that, do you think all these Western models are practical in a setting like in India? So are any success stories, any models that we can learn from?
Yes, actually. So I think one of the methods for teaching and learning skills that we've covered in the upcoming research piece is design thinking, for example. And I think you must have come across that as well. So Design for Change is an organization we evaluated in, I think, 3 or 4 states so far. And what they have a very simple model that works with in a relatively short time frame, but with very, very resource constrained places. I would say in terms of teacher capacity, teachers across the world are very, very overburdened, and we recognize that. Whether it's in the US or in Europe or in India, they are stretched for time. They're also, increasingly taking on more of a role of parents as well. So they are definitely burdened. But there is also the possibility of weaving in uh, skills into how they do things. So I mentioned the example of collaboration in Finland, for example, right? So that if you're doing some kind of a classwork, it can automatically be built into that, and it doesn't require any additional effort once that system is put in place. But at the same time, it doesn't always have to be cost intensive either. Tinkering activities, for example, can be done at fairly low costs with locally available material, or design thinking programs can be run at really, really low cost. So there were children in Tamil Nadu, we know, who built a school boundary wall based on waste bottles that they collected from the village. So yes, it required some amount of coordination and effort between the children and villagers and the teachers as well, but they managed to do that. So it doesn't always have to be expensive, and we do have, I think, in government schools, an okay, reasonable budget for teaching learning material as well, which can be very creatively used as well. So instead of just thinking about charts and things, maybe if we could just think of cardboard boxes, right? They could do so much more than just having charts, which is a very cheap way of getting creative as well. So
Okay, there's a couple of questions that I'll take from the chat and add to that. This being that the whole learning of life skills itself is essentially needs to be experiential, immersive, and all of that. And our schools are not really laboratories where that can happen. One, and two is I think two add-on questions to that is one person is asking about homeschooling and how within the ambit of homeschooling, with homeschooling catching up, how can all of this be incorporated, these life skills learning, and should we also be incorporating some of the Gurukula systems, and do you think those are practical extensions that need to be incorporated into part of this experiential immersive learning of life skills?
So I think the current pandemic has automatically made everything experiential. If you are at home and you're required to help your mom, regardless of how much you need to study, because she has to work and you have to do your schooling and stuff. That is learning. You are managing your time. There is a kind of breakdown of gender barriers because whether you're a boy or a girl, you have to help in the house. You have to help in the house. So the current scenario is definitely very immersive and experiential, whether we agree to it or not. But otherwise, I think, as I've mentioned earlier, just because something is experiential does not mean that it needs to be intensive. It can be embedded within what we are already doing within the classroom. Just very simple systems can be set up for these skills to be, for example, if one way of managing a classroom could be, okay, I'm going to assign a monitor and that person is going to take care of what's going on. and complain to the teacher if children are not listening, as opposed to instead of assigning that monitor one, you could figure out a voting system, in which case they're learning about democratic skills. Once that is in place, then they can actually come together and negotiate on the kind of set of rules they want within the classroom, which is teaching them negotiation skills. So the same thing without extra resources or maybe too much of extra time can be implemented as well. So again, we need to think very, very creatively about the solutions to bringing these skills. I think the one switch, if we make, saying that this is not an add-on, but built into what we do every single day, is really going to get these skills to be incorporated.
One of the things that the current crisis has taught us is that the one thing that we should not do is to expect or plan for something at all. So when we talk about planning for 21st century skills, so what are we actually planning for? Is that something that you want to comment about?
So if you look at the skills that I presented in that slide, which has some 50, 60 skills over there, none of the skills are new. They are basic human skills that have been there for as long as we have been around. Maybe the proportion of what is more crucial, creativity is a lot more, we call it now design thinking. Maybe that didn't exist earlier, but essentially to problem solve and come up with new ideas based on whatever problem you're presented with has been around forever. There's no new skill as such. I think the conversation on 21st century skills is being pushed forth as a 21st century skill conversation, because I think we've kind of finished off with the industrial era of teaching and learning, where we're sitting children down all facing the same way, preparing them to go into a factory.
Right.
So I think just the conversation on 21st century skills is sort of termed to kind of mark the end of that era in a way, and refocus our learning goals to what should really be taught. And I think when you were initially having the conversation, you talked about education versus learning versus schooling, and I think this is a great time to restart that conversation thing. Where is the real learning happening?
Yeah.
We have another very interesting question. We have been talking about 21st century skills for a learner. What about 21st century skills for a teacher?
Yes, so I think one of the things that I mentioned was that the unlearning part is very important, and unlearning is a 21st century skill, because it requires you to reevaluate everything that you have done so far. So reassessing and readjusting our own thought processes is in and of itself a fairly complex cognitive process. So first starting off with unlearning, going back to thinking that, okay, and one of the other points I had mentioned in the slide was that play-based learning is important. It's as important for the teacher to play as it is for the kids. So as to rethink the importance of play and bringing that back as well. And without modeling the kind of skills that we're trying to teach, there is no way that the children are going to learn. I mean, if a teacher is coming and shouting at the kids saying you sit down and you learn how to be empathetic, that is really not going to work. So they are equally important for both parties, as well as the extended ecosystem of stakeholders within the education system.
One question you just mentioned about play-based learning, and the NEP talks about arts integration into arts integrated curriculum and sports integrated curriculum as a method or a means to inculcate 21st century skills. Any comments on that?
A couple of comments. So as I mentioned, the NEP is a little bit prescriptive in terms of bringing in great ideas, but then telling people exactly how it should be done. So I think there is a discrepancy in us talking about, say creativity, but then telling you how to be creative. So that needs to be resolved sooner rather than later, because as it trickles down into the curriculum and implementation, it's going to create more problems. Sorry, so that was, could you just repeat the question?
The arts integrated curriculum and the sports integrated.
Right. So the current study that we are just wrapping up, that I had briefly presented, has also covered methods of sports, arts, and music in how they are helping to teach life skills or 21st century skills. There is a lot of literature, and these are especially very well established methods of life skills. And but we need to be very careful on how it is being done. Sports, for example, is a great example. Um, Sport by itself, if you're playing a sports, is very, very competitive. And the literature talks about that excessive competition actually being negative for the learning of life skills. So where sport is actually introduced with the purpose of teaching life skills and not just as a competition. So just playing sport for the sake of sport may not necessarily teach the kind of skills that we're looking at, but sport with the purpose of teaching life skills is actually going to help incorporate that. So the implementation methodology is also going to be key. And I think one of the interesting things that we've seen is a little bit worrisome as well, is that the evidence is very mixed for each of these methods. So we've gone into a deep dive on looking at all of the literature behind sport, music, debate, computational thinking on how they can teach life skills. And the causal evidence, so, sport definitely leads to teamwork, is thin. And despite the fact that these methods are very well established, very well touted, everyone says if you want to teach teamwork, you need to do sport. But it's a very fine balance between attributing the causal linkage to the actual pathway of how that happens. It is also contingent on who your coach was, how you were being coached, what is the level of competition, what is the level of stress. So a lot of other factors go into it. And if I'm making an intervention with so many if this and this and this and this, then the replicability of that is not going to be very easy. You cannot necessarily replicate the conditions of exactly one intervention, say in the United States, in India. So what is it that's still going to work over here? So the evidence really needs to be built up, and it is surprisingly slim and quite worrisome, to be honest.
A quick
Yeah.
question about assessments. When it comes to assessment at a school level in the classroom, are there any tools which can actually quantitatively measure life skills or 21st century skills?
So Praveen, if you could share one of the resources, the handbook on measuring 21st century skills.
Okay.
That is the handbook where we have outlined all of the skills, the 4 skills that I talked about earlier. What we've also done is we've taken each of the constructs and aligned existing assessments, and most of them are like in a Western context. Very few have been developed for the Indian context so far. But it has aligned all of the measurement tools available with the specific skills. So you can refer to that for the tools.
And one last question from my side, and then over to Ramesh. There seems to be a very, very thin line, or maybe no line, between vocational skills or skills towards employment and skills towards being a better human being. And all the literature seems to be kind of all over the place when it comes to talking about 21st century skills or life skills or vocational skills, and each one is kind of described in a way that one is the route to the other. Or for example, in vocational skills, introducing vocational education is seen as a way to address the pseudo dignity of labor issue. So we don't seem to have a clear roadmap when it comes to talking about any skilling that way. As long as it is memory based or curricular subjects where there are concrete boundaries drawn, it seems to be easier when it comes to implementation. Any quick comments on that?
A couple of things. So I think vocational skills are very distinct from life skills. They're very specific, hard skills for you to do a specific job. 21st century skills or life skills will have to go along with anything if you need to do a good job of it. So if you are trained to become, say, an electrician, and you are not turning up on time, or you're not careful with things, then you'll be creating trouble. So the life skills needs to go hand in hand with any other kind of training. And it's unfortunate that the word skills is common in both, but they're actually distinct sets that we're talking about. And does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Given the emphasis on vocational education and learning of vocational skills, I'll just club a question from the chat box on that same one. So how much of the schooling actually has to move out of schools, out of the classrooms itself, given that vocations have to be learnt at the place where this one is? So how much of schooling?
That vocation has to be learned.
Yeah, I'm saying given that vocational skills are to be learned, how much of the schooling actually needs to move out of the uh, environment of a classroom and into the actual a place where the skills can be learned?
So are we talking about two separate levels of education
Yes,
here?
yes.
Okay. So no, I think so. Vocational. I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused about the question. So vocational training happens post schooling, right? Or at least post secondary, if not senior secondary.
No, the reason I asked is some of the skills can actually be started off even while children are at schools.
Of course.
So do you think such skills need not necessarily be taught within the confines of a school, but rather taken to the place where they can actually be learnt, rather
So
than only
it
doing it within the environment of a school?
it could be either or. I don't think there's a definitive answer, and it's also a very different mindset in how we think about it. For example, there are a couple of schools in the US which have a lot of tools, and kids are using saws and all kinds of things. And these schools are sort of in the limelight for saying, we let kids do dangerous things, and they're very sort of rock star sort of schools. And there's only a few of them. But if you look at Scandinavia, every school has a workshop in there. There is no, I mean, they say that if a kid does not know how to fix their own house, how are they going to live their life? So it is a part of how they are growing up, and it's not a big deal. So having a workshop within a school, they're learning the basic skills of drilling and electrification, and it's really normal. So yes, we depending on what our goal is, but I think also talking to Praveen's previous question in terms of the compounding of vocational skills with life skills, I think that comes from a more fundamental problem of us not having defined the goal of education very clearly. Because up until now, up until the new education policy has come, we've been constantly catering to education for jobs, and that conversation definitely has changed as a result of the policy. How it will get implemented is a different question. But we need to rethink the goal of education. So far it's jobs, either as a vocational training and then a job, or some kind of an employment later on. So compounding learning with that just single-minded goal of earning a living, I wouldn't say is wrong, because it's a practical reality of our country. But at the same time, we need to be nudging it in a direction where learning actually means learning, and not just for the sake of a job.
One last question before we go to concluding remarks. You yourself studied science as a subject. So what prompted you to move into changing education, rather influencing education as the sector that you've chosen? What prompted you? Is there something that got you into this?
Yes. So I did my PhD in biochemistry, and I was doing my postdoctoral research in biophysics. I was in California at the time, and I started volunteering for Asha for Education, which was a nonprofit that does fundraising in the US and funds education projects in India. And one of the projects that I was coordinating was still running in Odisha in the Ganjam district, where they had a number of children from the local tribal areas who had some form of disability, who used to come to a specific center and stay there for the entire academic year. While at the same time, the person who was running the organization was fighting for the right to be in school at the same time. So we were funding that, that residential place, and I was in conversation with some of my colleagues who were working on disability and doing research on that, and that interest in how policy can impact things like this, because this person had to fight every single day to get a child into a regular school. And I had the idea that policy is likely to be able to influence things like this, and therefore I decided to make the switch. But I will add that I think going in this direction was far more fruitful than it would have been going in the opposite direction. Because coming from the science angle into the education angle brought that kind of rigor in thinking and analysis, which you cannot reverse. So they're definitely, so running randomized controlled trials, for example, came very naturally because it is the experimental approach to doing things. And the scientific thinking or is something which I think, regardless of who you are, really needs to be incorporated into every aspect of life skills, because fundamentally it is a logical thinking process. And one of the reasons why we are having this level of bigotry and intolerance in the country and globally is because people are not thinking logically and clearly. And I would advocate, if I could, every child would study science and love science, not just for the sake of memorizing things. Just the process of being open to inquiry, being open to observations and inferring from that, as opposed to just jumping to conclusions, is something which is crucial as a thinking process in general.
Akanksha, thank you for taking the time out to answer all those questions patiently.
Thank you. They were great questions.
And yeah, so over to you now for the concluding remarks. If you have any final thoughts, if you would like to leave us with your final comments and thoughts.
Sure. Dr. Balu, would you like to add something?
I wait for you to finish it.
Okay.
I respond to a lot of things that you said.
Sure. So I think life skills are fundamental. Life skills are important, and we need to start thinking of them as part of who we are and how we do things, rather than as add-on. That's crucial. They are also very complicated. Currently, we are trying to simplify it, as at least from the research point of view, and we're hoping we would be able to contribute to that conversation. And but we think these skills are really, really crucial for us to be in a world which is at peace and not at war continuously. Even dealing with problems like the current pandemic requires us to put some kind of logic into how we are behaving and what we are doing. So at all levels of life, I think the skills are crucial, and we'll just stop at that.
That was wonderful. So I'll quickly jump in and respond to Akanksha's. I think life skills is not something, 21st century skills as the word is known. When I began my journey in space of education, the fashion statement was life skills. And 5-6 years ago, we evolved the fashion statement into 21st century skills. But obviously, the work that you have done is enormous in understanding and unpacking it. I think that is very critical. We sometimes work without fixed definitions. We don't have an understanding which all of us agree to. What I might mean as creativity might be, in its own sense, subjectively interpreted differently. To give it an objective meaning and understand, appreciate, replicate in a classroom is a huge, complex challenge. I think the book, and Praveen shared the links of Eval Design's downloadable report and book, which is something very interesting. And I think most teachers on this program today, I would urge you to download it because you will find it very useful. My concern has always been, we all fall in love with fashion statements of the day. And till the next fashion statement takes over, we get obsessed with it. Right now, the fashion statement, I'm afraid, is NEP. And when people get tired of NEP, and then we'll have something new fashion statement to follow. But NEP is a great policy, a great beginning. And I know that the people who are in the committee who wrote it, several of them have shared their views with me. It is not supposed to be a static document for a decade or 20 years. It's supposed to be a very vibrant, lively, dynamic piece of work, like understanding of 21st century skills are going to be. So from theory to practice to a classroom to making a real impact on a child is a long journey for every one of us involved in this. And Akanksha is sort of in a very simplified 1 hour sharing. Thank you for helping us unpack it a bit. I know you need a whole semester to teach us about the whole thing, but keeping it. And I've always been fascinated that from science, and I like your explanation, from moving from the sciences to the space of humanities and understanding education is possibly an easier transition than the reverse. Well, I don't fully agree that the reverse is also not possible. I do believe that a lot of soft sides of science needs to be strengthened. And a lot more people should also start trying to move to the other side. It was great. It is, as always, a pleasure to be interacting with you, and we hope to, from SVIM, keep tapping into your brains and your talent and your knowledge to help us further unpack it in our institutions and in our work. So thank you again for responding to our request, Akanksha, and
Thank you so much for having me. It was really nice, and I loved answering the questions as well.
I hand it over back to Ramesh now to take it forward.
Yeah, so thank you everyone. I think we have completed one more session. We would request you to share your feedback and questions. We'll try to get answers to those questions. You can email Praveen uh, at the email ID, or message him or me at these email IDs. You could also follow us on our Twitter. You just have to search for WeLead on Twitter, or you could we have a YouTube channel where this is also beaming live, and we have uh, several people who have logged in as well. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go in and look for WeLead training, and you could subscribe to our YouTube channel. We also run a podcast where the recording of this would also be shared, and so you could subscribe to our podcast as well. We already have quite a few subscribers, but look for more subscribers. And next week we'll have on Teachers Day, we will be in conversation with Dr. K. Kasturi Rangan, the former chairman ISRO, as well as the chairman of the drafting committee of the National Education Policy. It's something that I'm sure each one of you is also looking forward to, as we are looking forward to. And finally, thank you, Akanksha. Thank you for a wonderful session, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Ramesh, may I just intervene?
Yeah.
Please, for the listeners, please note that there's a small change in timings. Next week, we will actually meet during daytime.
Yeah, during the day. Yeah.
11 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Yeah. And so we, like Praveen said, we will be meeting between 11 and 12, and it's not going to be 7 and 8 as earlier. And thank you for everyone for coming, and thank you for joining us. And we look forward to having your company again next week between 11 and 12, and then subsequent sessions as well. Thank you, and have a great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.